So the next thing we want to look at is adding a little more interaction between Mario and the Goomba. Specifically, speaking to having Mario interact with him by jumping on top and then actually killing the Goomba that way. So right now, if we look at our enemy Goomba script, we're doing an on-trigger enter. And we can go ahead and add our functionality right in here. We're checking for tags for a path node. Why don't we go ahead and check for a tag on Mario? We could say if other dot tag is equal to, let's see, what is the collision on the bottom of Mario? So we can zoom into Mario and we say, okay, well, we do have a collision box down here. And what exactly is that collision box? We'll look at the player, and we have a collision box feet right there at the player's feet. So let's just copy that, and that's what we're going to check for because of the collision tag right in there. So we're going to check for the interaction there. And what are we going to do if something happens? Well, we need to get a link to the player game object. So we can, there's a lot of different ways we can do it just to experiment and do different ways. Let's go ahead and set one up by simply finding the object inside of the scene. So we'll do a player link, and we'll set it up as a game object. And let's say we actually go in there and do a player link equals game object, and on this one we'll do a find. And what are we going to look for? Well, if we're actually doing a find object, let's go in and actually find the object that's here. We can go in and find the player object. And that's going to be our player right here, because we're going to want to get control of the components inside of here. So we'll go in and say, let's find our player. Nice and simple. And then what do we want to do with that? Well, let's get one of the components in there. We're going to go for our player link. And we're going to get a component. And which component are we going to be getting? Well, we're going to get our player controls. And why do we want to get our player controls? Well, if we're going to have Mario jumping up in the air and landing on the head, we want to be able to push Mario back up into the air, just like inside of the game. So we're going to go in, we're going to get our player controls, and we want to get our velocity. And what do we want to do with this velocity? Well, it's the velocity y, so that we can push him up into the air. And we want to have some sort of force. So we had an option up here to use like a death force. What is this force that we want to push up when our player dies? So we'll plug that one right into there. Basically, this is to make the player bounce in the air. Now, we've got this part set up. Now, what else do we actually want to do with it? We could check for additional things like pushing the player back and away from the Goomba. We can also do things to kill the Goomba. If we are going to be jumping on him, then we do want to kill him. But for right now, let's go ahead, save this one out, and see what we can do with this one. Zoom out just a little bit. If we've got no errors, then we can move over with our object. It's going to be a little bit hard to get in here. Now you notice that something's kind of happening in here. And what's actually happening is that we're having a hard time finding the trigger with our current setup on top with Mario. So let's go ahead and slide this one over. And we'll take the override and the change off. And we're just going to set this to right. And we're going to just set this one to left. That way we can kind of keep him in there while we experiment. So in here we're going to move, we'll jump. We're kind of bouncing, right? There we go. So let's see if we can get that interaction a little bit better. Part of that's going to be changing up the collision boxes around Mario so we have a little more space right in here to judge for if the feet actually hit it and not one of the other collision boxes before it. But just to make sure, let's make sure that we actually have a pretty high force set here. So our force is just a 3. Let's make sure that it's nice and obvious for us. There we go. So we've got Mario jumping on top of him. Now, when he landed and he hit and he didn't bounce off, it's just because of the other colliders in the scene. And that's where we want to make sure that we're adjusting some of those positions. So we're going to go back in to our Mario character, and we're going to change our collision box, namely just this large one right in here. We're going to change that one out just a little bit. So this is going to be the collision box body. The height of it's good, it's just the lower part where the feet are. We'll go in and make a couple of adjustments. And we're going to have to bump it up just a little bit and change out that size just a little bit right in there. There we go. This way we don't get any kind of overlaps while we're jumping with our collision boxes. Now the next thing we want to do is we're not really looking at having him constantly go on top. We just want that one time we hit, we want to be able to kill off our Goomba and get rid of him. And we also want to get rid of our collider so that we're not constantly bouncing on him, but removing that box collider on our Goomba right in here. So to do that, we need to go back over to our script, and we need to check for a couple of things. One of them is to check for the box collider on the Goomba, which is right in here. So let's set that one up. We're going to go in and simply do a variable box collider, and we'll make that equal to our get component box collider. And we're going to set that as a box collider, which is similar to casting right in here. And we'll check for if our box collider, if it is what? Well, if it's true, and we do have one, then what do we want to do with it? Well, let's do something with our box collider. We could destroy our box collider and get rid of it. We could simply just change the size of our box collider. So if we were to change the size, we could change the vectors to 0, 0, 0. We could also go in and destroy a box collider if we wanted to. However we handle that, either way, we'll throw both of them in there just for the fun of it. Then the next thing we want to do is we do want to change the state of the Goomba, which is to kill the Goomba. So let's change our Goomba state. And this is going to equal what? This is going to equal the Goomba state dot if we go to our death, we've got die right and die left. If we go to the top, we have our settings for move, jump, and enemy die. So we're looking for our enemy die. And we could do a little bit of error checking right in here. So if we don't load that box up, we'll do a quick debug log. Could not load box collider. Okay, so let's save that out. Let's hit play, and let's jump. There we go. And we jumped on top. And does he continue to follow us? Yes. Because what we have done, if we check our enemy die, and we look at our die right and die left, we can see that we have commented out our destroy object. So let's go in there and add that back in. We'll hit play, and this time around, there we go. We go in, and Mario takes care of business and gets rid of that Goomba. Okay, now the next thing that we want to look at, we've got this interaction. He's jumping, he's hitting, he's bouncing up. We're killing off our Goomba. That works really great. Well, let's drop a few more Goombas in here. Let's see what happens if we have a few Goombas. So we'll drop one in, we'll drop another one in. Let's even turn the direction. Instead of left, let's move him right. So we are able to kind of jump and hit and do things. What we need to double check on is how do the Goombas interact with each other. Let's go and change him to move right. Now they are bumping into each other with their collision boxes, so they're not really ignoring each other. And we do want them to do a little ignoring. We want them to just pass through each other. So let's go ahead and do another check up here. We're doing a check for, all these other tags. Let's go and just drop another one in here. We'll do if other.tag is equal to, let's say, enemy. Because we're going to check for, is it hitting another enemy? And if it is, what should we do about it? Can we ignore the collision of another object? If we can ignore the collision of another object, then they can just pass right through each other and then not really bother with each other. So we'll say inside of here, if other.collider is not equal to collider, then inside of here we're simply going to do a physics ignore. Ignore collision. And what are we looking for on the collision? We're looking for two colliders. What are we going to be ignoring? So we're looking for the other collider and the collider. So we'll do other dot collider, comma collider. And that'll get us set up so that we can not worry about the other Goombas in our scene, unless we still have something else on them that we need to check for. So right now we're still getting that same little pile up. Let's make sure we've actually saved our script out. And we've got our tag checking for our enemy. And we'll just double check with our movement. This way our Goombas can pass through each other. And that is just using the if other collider not equal to the collider, our physics ignore function. It lets us kind of ignore those two objects. If you do have a little bit of trouble when you're working with that, one thing to take note of is the order of the components inside of the inspector. We do have a character controller above the box collider. Sometimes I've seen an issue with that. So just be sure that you're taking note of where those are placed. Make sure the box collider is set to a trigger. Okay, so we have the basic movement between path nodes, and we've got our characters ignoring each other really good. The one thing we are going to notice, though, as we place more Goombas inside of our scene, because Goombas are fun to place and to jump on and squash, we do start to clutter up the environment with a lot of gizmos. So we do have a toggle here, but our toggle doesn't actually function yet. So let's add a little bit more code in here, which will finish off our enemy Goomba script. And we're just dropping in a real simple conditional statement in our function on draw gizmos. We'll do if our gizmo toggle is true, then let's draw all of our crazy colors and if it's not, then we're not going to draw anything at all. So we'll come back into here, and then this is just per Goomba. So if we go in and say, well, I just don't want his stuff to show up, then we can turn it off. We could turn it off, and maybe we want to leave that guy's on. Okay, so let's hit play on that, and there we go. And maybe our jump is just a little bit too high right now. We could bump that down. And we'll go ahead and tweak that on our prefab here. We'll say, let's say this is going to be, instead of 10, let's make that somewhere around 6. We'll apply that back out to all the prefabs. There we go. It's a little more like the game.